Hey everyone. This lesson is all about narrative elements, and it is inspired by a lesson on page 131 of the Reading Comprehension Blueprint by Nancy Lewis Hennessy. And that lesson is titled Checking the Student's Narrative Knowledge. For this lesson, I will be using a Nearpod and using the book Last Stop on Market Street by Matt De La Pena. And students will also be working on a storyboard at the end. So kind of what I would do as the teacher here is kind of start with the objective for today and tell students today our objective is to identify and understand the narrative elements in The Last Stop on Market Street by Matt De La Pena. Now, at this point of kind of the unit, students would have already been pretty familiar with narrative elements. We'd have spent a few lessons on it already. And for students, the second thing I would do here is just go through and review those different elements. So the characters, setting, problem, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, and theme. So those will be what we will be focusing on today. Now, the next part of the lesson, we would read the story. And so take about 5 to 6 minutes here. On the next slide, there's a video, but I would strongly instruct students as you're listening to the story, can you start to identify either moments or events or parts of the story that fit these elements? Because afterwards, we're going to be doing some work about it. So then the next step, going through, and I could play this video or read the book for the students. But then we would go through and I would have students get into groups so that they can get a few different opinions and possible answers to answer these questions. Then we'd go through and answer questions about each element. And the nice thing about Nearpod is they type in their answer here, and then the teacher can see all of the group answers, and we can kind of discuss them as we go through. And so the first one is focusing on who are the main characters in the story and how would you describe those characters, both physical, but also trying to get a little bit more into their personality as well. And so with this one, we would discuss, okay, CJ's Nana. What do the different groups think, especially when we get into personality traits and things like that. Also, at the beginning of a story, the setting is established. And this is an interesting story because the setting changes, but each setting is pretty important to the story. And so why do you think each setting or each place that they go is important to the story? And so we can talk about those different settings once students have imported their answers and submitted them. Then we get into more of the events of the story, more of the plot. So starting with the problem. So I'd have students work in their groups. Okay, what do you think is the main problem here, especially for CJ, as he's kind of the character that goes through the transformation in this story? And then how do you think the problem got started? And for this one, I'd like to discuss what the students say, but also instruct the students where I would consider to be the problem. He struggles with having to do things that are different than other people, and he just isn't able to see the beauty in those things that his Nana is able to see. So then have students start to think about, okay, what events happen because of this problem for CJ? Have students type in their thoughts, and then we discuss them as a class. Then what is the story's climax? This is a tricky one, I think, for this story, because there isn't a lot of tension, but there is a moment in this story when CJ has to make a decision, or maybe there's a moment of change for him. So students can discuss and talk about what they think it is, type in their thoughts. And then for this one, I'd think it's important to talk together as a class. Okay, that moment of climax is when he's listening to the music. He starts to see the beauty. Okay, what led up to this moment and what's going to happen because of this next? So getting into that falling action. Okay, why does CJ start to feel different? How did the music on the bus change him? And then the last question in terms of plot here, do you think he was glad at the beginning? And compare that to the end. Why does he say, I'm glad we came? Has his problem been solved? Okay, so going through all of those plot structure and plot elements here together as a class. And then One last part of this Nearpod here, discussing theme. And the cool thing about here is they would type in and it would pop up every time they would show, or they would type something and it would display on the screen here. So we could see all the different ideas that students have in terms of what is the big idea? What lesson does the author want us to understand about the world or want us to learn? So once we finish this Nearpod here together, the last part of the lesson is more of an assessment piece, and students will be creating storyboards. So I'd go through and say, okay, now you're going to create a storyboard that shows these different elements of the story. So for each one, you're going to draw a picture and then include a sentence that describes what that picture is showing. And then they would get this or something that looks like this. And they would be able to, okay, we're going to do characters, setting, what's the problem, what is one event or a couple events that show what happens because of the problem, what's the climax, and then what's that resolution here. So they would draw their pictures here and then write their sentences at the bottom. And this would really give the teacher a good understanding of which students are, yeah, they're really getting it, or which students need a little bit extra instruction. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this is something you can use in your own classroom.